and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your restricted by sprite count host, Madelyn.
I'm your representation of something conceptually terrifying, host Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. This week's show that came out at a time that was previously 1 p.m., but now it's 12 p.m. The scariest monster of all. The standard time.
Yes. We're getting an extra hour this time, though, so
yeah,
it's the good monster.
It's not worth the next 6 months, but correct, an extra hour today.
It's the nice monster instead of the mean monster, right?
I don't know if I agree with that.
They're both still monsters.
Sure. I would disagree on which one. Like, I think ultimately the fact that the sun is going to set today at like 4:50 is the mean monster, but what do I know?
Fair enough.
Anyway, it's Emma's side quest here on November 2nd, 2025. What are we talking about this week?
This week, since it's still, lingering,
Spooky.
The spooks are lingering in the air as we move into November. I wanted to talk about monsters and creatures and such in video games. We've talked about character design before. We've talked about horror games before. So I wanted to do something a little spooky, but a little different. And obviously, creature design is like a big thing you could probably take a couple different courses on, if not more. But I thought it would be fun to just sort of talk about monsters in games and how those get designed and implemented and so on and so forth.
It's a good Halloween-themed episode. I gotta hand it to you.
This was making me think about, I think it was The Reaper. Like the one time I played The Sims.
Yeah, The Reaper in The Sims is the scariest monster.
Yeah, it just like showed up at night. I don't remember which Sims we had of The Sims, actually.
3, I think.
3. But yeah, it just showed up at night, and that's, I think, when I went, nah, I think I'm good.
Yeah, it's too scary.
It was too scary for me.
Devs should learn something from this. Because it's too scary.
I was also I remember being quite scared playing Kingdom Hearts 1 whenever, is it a cheetah?
Oh, now that you say that, I think it might be a cheetah, yes.
The cheetah, whatever its name is in Jungle Book, whenever it would show up sort of randomly.
You don't mean Jungle Book.
I mean in the movie Jungle Book, which the character is from.
Tarzan.
Oh, you're right. I do mean the movie. They both did whatever. Yes, in the movie Tarzan, in the world Deep Jungle in Kingdom Hearts 1, the cheetah occasionally will just appear instead of Heartless, and that also always very much scared me, I remember.
Ultimately, what Emma is afraid of is unexpected appearances, is what it sounds
like. Kind of, yeah. At least as a child, that's definitely what I was afraid of.
No longer.
I'm probably still. I don't like it when I get a knock at the door,
Yeah. That's fair. Well, would you believe that video games have a lot of monsters?
No.
And, what I'll say is I feel like that intro there, slightly silly as it is, it gets at sort of two of the major prongs of monster design here. Namely, it's partially about character design, right? Grim Reaper, kind of a classically scary design. Cheetah, yes. Maybe not so much. But also an important part of monster design being behavior, which, Emma, I feel like you did a lot of interesting reading about that, while I did a bunch of reading about how do they make Pokemon.
That's interesting, to be fair.
No, I know. But I hadn't thought as much, when you suggested this idea for the podcast, I thought about, oh yes, sure, how do you draw a scary little guy? But it was interesting to think also about, not only how do you draw a scary little guy, but how do you program a scary little guy? How does a scary little guy act?
Yeah. Because the scary little guys, provided that they are, like, independent monsters that have gameplay implications and aren't just either like visual things or story things or whatever. But you do have to think about how your monsters are interacting with the environment that you've made, which was something I hadn't really thought about. Of like, oh yeah, right. The AI needs to be able to navigate the environment in smart, scary ways. There was one, I think it was a game developer article with a bunch of different devs talking about like 2D monsters specifically, and one of the developers of the game, Sundered, was talking about like they have like two major movement design patterns for their monsters. One that can fly in front of the environment instead of having to deal with the levels collision. And then also creatures that can navigate all their wall and ceiling combinations, which the better the AI is at pathfinding, apparently the less you can have on screen at one time, probably. Which makes sense, I guess.
Well, and it was interesting to read about those kinds of restrictions from the sort of smallest level. I mean, I don't know too much about Sundered, but I assume it's relatively indie, all the way up to, I read an article with the Monster Hunter World kind of main guys, and there's a bunch of interesting stuff in that interview that I'm sure I will talk about over the course of the episode. But at the end of this interview on with RIP former Vice Games, former Waypoint, whatever that site is now, but not that. The interviewer asked them, okay, like, why aren't there spiders? Like, it seems natural that there would be spiders in this game because they're monsters, and like, why don't you have them? And are you scared of them? And the art director, Fujioka, basically said, "We're not scared of spiders, you loser. It's just that we can only have so many rigs." Right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things you can do with a monster that's like functionally a lion, right? Most animals are four-legged situations like that. But if you make a spider rig, that's a lot of, development time and resources and assets that you have to create for something that like nothing else moves that way. Nothing else has a body shape like that.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. I don't know. It's another one of these like, oh, Madelyn is dumb and game development is hard kind of things. But it was interesting to read so many of these articles about monster design that are basically like, hey, making a video game is hard. And having and things being scary, like a big part of something being scary is it being smart or it being able to move in a specific way. And that's hard to do at all levels of development. Right, there are restrictions on what you can do successfully in that way at all levels of development, and those restrictions really often guide the kinds of monsters that are being created.
Yeah, it depends on like your design goals too, right? Like a spider monster would probably be great if it's like a showcase thing, right? Like it's like a big like boss encounter situation. This spider thing is a big memorable thing, or it's throughout the whole game or whatever, versus Monster Hunter's whole design ethos is like there's a whole bunch of different monsters that you can go and interact with and learn about and stuff, right? And to have a whole bunch of different monsters, then you have to prioritize how you're making those monsters and do it efficiently. And yeah, making a spider that's just kind of like hanging out in the world isn't that efficient.
Yeah. They said maybe someday.
One of the articles, I don't remember why I saw this, but I think it was just like one of my suggested articles when you open like a tab and it's like, here's some stuff. But this month there was an interview with Games Radar with an Alien Isolation writer, which Alien Isolation, I don't know how old that game is. Oh, I guess it was on a podcast. And I was just reading the Games Radar summary of it. But that game has the Xenomorph as like the big stalking monster in that game, right? throughout the whole experience, you have to be sort of avoiding and outsmarting the xenomorph in order to survive. And in the course of making the game, because obviously they were working on level design and the xenomorph's behavior and AI at like the same time, they realized that once they added the xenomorph into the level design, things took a lot longer than they did originally, because it got very smart. Like at the beginning, right, they're working on it, so it only has like certain behaviors and patterns, but then as development continues, they add more behaviors and patterns to it, and it becomes a much more serious threat, and at the end of the day, it compounded so much that it seriously would pad out the runtime of what a player would actually experience with the game to like 20 hours long, which is quite long for a horror game. It does seem to be like they just like kept designing the xenomorph. And like at that point it's like, well, but we can't like cut levels from it anymore either, so I guess it's just a long game.
It's an interesting parallel to the classic story of, like the devs QA tested it and the game wasn't too hard, and then everybody else played it, and because they weren't experts, the game was way too hard. Right?
It is probably a little bit of that too, right?
Well, that too. I just mean it's an interesting, it feels like of a kind, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting to think about. I mean, obviously stalking monsters are like the thing in I could say the thing in horror games now, but probably are just the thing in horror games, right? And that's a really interesting challenge to have to think about. How do you work concurrently on these different things when, you know, the monster's behavior is going to build out at the same time your levels are going to build out in a way you might not be 100% able to predict unless you've got like a really good producer. And that's like seems like a very interesting challenge, or a difficult challenge.
Yeah.
How do you calibrate the difficulty when everything has to be kind of, when you're building the plane as you're flying it?
Another famous stalking enemy that I looked up upon being reminded of the xenomorph is Mr. X in Resident Evil 2. Specifically, I looked at Mr. X's behavior. He's like just like a big guy. He's like a big zombie guy that like stomps around the police station and chases you, and you are unable to permanently put him down until the story time to do so, essentially. So you're running around the police station with him always like around the police station also. And so they want it to feel like Mr. X is always sort of wandering around the space, but the way that the levels work is only the adjacent rooms to where the player is are actually loaded. The rest of the police station just loads as you move from room to room, and things unload as you move from room to room as well. So there's the question of like, how is Mr. X actually like moving around the police station? Are they cheating in like making him teleport at certain times, or how are they making it so that he can follow you around? And essentially, apparently, he just kind of speed walks.
Yeah, it was funny looking.
He speed walks like in his animation, and also he does like wander the area of the police station, but because everything is unloaded, he doesn't actually have to navigate the environment in the way that the player would have to, right? Because nothing's loaded around him. They do apparently teleport him occasionally, but usually just to set him like in a door frame instead of like in the middle of a room if you're like entering it. And there's also like, he will sort of react to you making noise and will come follow you that way. And there's certain times where he is actually triggered and will immediately beeline to your location, regardless of whether you've like stunned him or he's like far away or whatever. And so it's an interesting solution of like, they want him to, you know, they want it to feel like fair, right? Like you can get away from him and do stuff, but they also want him to feel like ever present. And if he was just sort of normally walking around and the whole environment was loaded, it would be very probable that he would just get stuck somewhere and the player would be able to like safely complete all of the tasks that they needed to without him ever like being there. So instead they've created a system where like he is kind of ever present and he is kind of cheating, but he's also not, right? Like he is moving through the environment in a real quote unquote way, but he has advantages that you don't have.
Was your impression, though, that he would get stuck because it's just not possible to have an AI that can navigate that well for the like resource ability of it? Or is it just that
Possibly
the world
yes, but also I just think that the more space he would actually have to travel, the more the player would actually be able to like outrun him or trick him somehow, right? In a way that this system doesn't really let them do.
Right. I was just curious in reading about that because, yeah, I was like, oh, I understand that the issue here might be it's just not a good use of your resources to have a robot here that's smart enough to like walk around every coffee table or whatever. And that's like reasonable and understandable. But then I was like, oh, is it that, or is it that it's just big enough that even with a smart AI, there's no reason he would ever find you?
Yeah, I think
maybe it's a combination of both.
If it really felt like he was wandering around the whole place at his normal speed, I think it would be pretty easy to stay away from him in a way that his speed walking doesn't actually allow you to do. But it's an interesting case.
Cool peek under the hood.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to dig a little into, on all sorts of monsters, like the actual process of, okay, how are we, like, what kind of monster are we building here? What should it look like to suggest whatever? I mean, you had a good article, what is this, from Games Industry Biz, that was about, well, it was very much about, okay, you need to design a monster, but you probably want to start by thinking about what's the function of the monster, which on one hand is very obvious, but on the other hand is not necessarily how I am thinking about art design for things. I sort of think, oh, artists draw something cool. And they go, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, this was an article by, or with, Sam Santala. And yeah, it's like when the creature is serving a function in the game, but also the creature might be serving a function in the world, right? Or like have a function, maybe I should say, in the world. So I think that both of those can be ways to start on design. Like for the game purposes, I think it broke it down into like killable enemies, friends and partners, mounts, just generally like if there's different like fantasy races, Lord of the Rings style, and then like environmental creatures, right? Like the big robot that you climb on in Nier Automata, right. Or
Monstro.
Sure, yeah. And those are like the game functions it serves, and that might impact its design, right? If it's an enemy, for example, it might have a weak point gameplay wise, and the design may want to draw attention to that weak point, right? But it might also be like a carnivore or a herbivore, and those have certain biological design traits in the world that would also be things to consider when designing them.
I loved all the weird little kind of gimmicky advice in this article.
Yeah.
Like I liked the draw the animal's baby if you want to try to like build the emotional connection. I liked just get rid of the eyes.
Yeah.
If you wanted to be scary.
Or add more. I feel like that wasn't in the article, but I do feel like that's a choice you could make. Right?
That's true.
You can remove the eyes,
wrong number
or
of eyes.
You can add more eyes, like an absurd number of eyes. Also scary. I also like the point of like, if you want it to be more relatable, just have it act like a dog.
Yeah.
Which is so true for all like the article points at like Maximus from Tangled, who is a horse but is a dog. And all Disney creatures, if you really look at them,
are really dogs.
They're really dogs. It's so true.
Well, on a similar note, again, this interview with Ryozo Tsujimoto, who's the producer, and then the executive director, art director, Kaname Fujioka from Monster Hunter, kind of took like a similar approach, right? They were asked about, okay, this is a game, Monster Hunter is all about having lots of monsters and you hunt them. It's like kind of right there. It's what's on the tin.
Yes.
But they talked very little about, oh, we had a cool idea for what a monster looks like and we wanted to make it, right? It was all very practical for that game. They go, all right, like in the beginning of the game, you've got to design tutorial monsters that are going to teach the player how to play the game, right? And then we have a certain progression of which areas you go to, right? So there've got to be harder monsters in the ice stage than in the forest stage or whatever, because that's the like order the player is going to encounter them. Or there are other points in the game where we want to like teach the player to use like a specific weapon or a different item, and we have to design a monster that's going to be suited to teaching them that. So it was really interesting in that game where like monsters are the whole thing, that very little of what they talked about was
visual design.
Yeah, visual design. It was like very practically, how is this thing serving our game at this point? I mean, so they did then talk a little bit about visual design actually in a way that I found interesting, which it was also kind of gameplay related, right? They were like, okay, so this is a game where you're like hunting and killing monsters, right? And it's a game that, has visuals, like the visuals have continued to evolve over time, over different releases for this. And they talked in this interview about how like it's a fine line to walk with that more realistic design of, you want it to be beautiful and realistic looking and look like a real creature, but you don't want it to feel so realistic that the player is like, oh, like I'm killing a giraffe right now and I should feel bad about that.
Yeah.
So I thought that's a really tricky game design thing of like, that all that like dissonance of any game that features any kind of violence, right? Is players want it to be realistic and they want it to be beautiful, but they don't want to feel like they're shooting a dog.
They don't want to shoot a dog.
Yeah.
a real point of discussion among gamers.
Yeah. Or like they want these monsters to feel like they're real and from this environment and they live in this environment, but they don't want you to, like they told a story about like a father and a son playing the game, and the father was like, all right, we gotta kill this monster to get resources, and the son was like, whoa, wait a minute, like I don't think we should kill that thing.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating to hear the developers of a like very successful and also very monster focused game. Yeah, the only visual design discussion they had was like, does it make sense that it lives in the ice? And is it realistic enough that it looks like it's part of the world, but not so realistic that the player is going to experience guilt?
Yeah. Yeah, Monster Hunter is tricky for me.
Yeah.
That's off topic, I guess.
Yeah.
We can talk about hunting in games some other time, maybe.
But that's like, an important gameplay consideration for design is how is the player interacting with this monster, and like does the way it looks square with what the player is going to be doing to it?
Yeah, there was another in the 2D monster design game developer article, Chris Bourassa, who worked on Darkest Dungeon, was talking about like the conventional wisdom of monster design or just enemy design in games in general is that if the monster is bigger, it's more dangerous.
Yeah.
That's why bosses are bigger.
Yeah.
Right? Usually. And so he tried to subvert it a little bit by making some of the cuter enemies be more stressful than the big enemies, which was interesting. He also, there was a tweet that was linked in this article where he said that a horrifying monster needs to represent a horrifying idea, and that it should be like a bigger conceptual terror, which sounds like it needs to be deep, but I don't think it necessarily does. So I do sort of agree with that, but sometimes your concept is like fire is scary. And that's true.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be like psychological, I think. It can sometimes just be like, yeah, that thing's scary, and this is representative of it.
Well, and I think that becomes more and more essential over time, right? I mean, we've all seen scary stuff. Like, sorry, I'm not a visual artist. I don't mean to be like, oh, there's no new ideas. But at this point, like, could you really design something so much scarier than Pyramid Head or whatever? Like, haven't we already attained the peak of fearful imagery that can be generated by a human being somewhere? And haven't we all mostly seen that? Like, it's hard for me to imagine seeing like a new monster design and going, ugh, just the look of that is scarier than anything I've ever seen. So yeah, it's gotta like make me think of my mortality or something. Absolutely.
Sometimes just putting a monster design in a different context can work to make things scarier too, though. I don't know if I think that people can come up with more terrifying things. But we talked in like our horror podcast, a lot of what's scary is like not knowing what something looks like completely.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. But another reason I was thinking about this is because I've been playing Silent Hill F, which actually has a pretty limited amount of like monster designs. And a lot of them are even like just sort of variations on each other. And for my first playthrough, I did not find very much of it like scary. I found it disturbing a lot.
Sure.
But I wasn't like really scared. But in the New Game Plus playthrough, certain environments are changed to be different than the first time you went through. And one of them is the middle school, where the first time you enter this time, the second time through, the scarecrow enemies that turn up throughout the game are already there, not moving. They're just around in the school and in the schoolyard, and none of them jump at you. They just look at you. And that was scary. I had seen these scarecrow enemies throughout the game before, and I found them creepy, and I found them representative of a bigger horror concept or whatever. But it was really just the context of walking through an empty middle school with the scarecrow enemies everywhere, not even like actively threatening me at the beginning. That was like the scariest bit of that game to go through, which was interesting to experience, I guess.
Well, that does, I mean, this is a slightly different version of that, but it does seem like a general tenet of creating something scary is taking something familiar, in this case, a monster that you've already seen somewhere, and making it just a little off.
Yeah.
And in that sense, what is scarier than a semi-naked woman?
So true.
You know?
That's also what Silent Hill F is about.
Am I right, fellas?
Yeah, even outside of horror, it really is a pet peeve of mine in like fantasy. This happens in anime a lot, where there's like different races that are like animal inspired, and the men look totally different from humanoids, and the women have cat ears.
Did you see that little comic
I did.
posted?
I looked at the little comment you sent me, and it's so true.
Yeah.
Every race in fantasy is like, there's this cool looking male design, and then there's the sexy lady with like bark.
Yeah. And she's scary.
But there's also a lot of like female like horror monsters that retain some semblance of their humanoid shape. Like once you start noticing it, you keep noticing it, which can range from anything from like Lady D in Resident Evil Village, which is clearly supposed to be like sexy scary at the same time, right? To stuff that's like wow, sex is scary.
Yeah.
In good and bad ways.
Yeah.
There was an article, I saw you grab this article too. I don't know if it was an article or like a dissertation or something, or if it was like, it was written a little bit weird, but was still interesting. Of talking about like, Silent Hill 2 has a lot of female enemy designs that are kind of both scary and sexy at the same time. But that's very much like on purpose, right? It's a commentary on what that character, what James Sunderland sees as monstrous, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have this woman's scary because she's sexy.
Right.
They brought up like the summons in Final Fantasy, specifically 14, but I think this is true across the series, is female summons, usually sexy lady.
Yeah.
Male coded summons, usually some kind of creature.
Yeah.
Which is another example of that.
Well, I do think there's something to, I was in various Reddit threads about this. The idea that, like, we're only going to read a creature as female if it's got, bazoongas.
This was called, by the way, Designing the Body Female Monster Design in Video Games.
Yeah.
That was the article I read.
So it's like, we're never going to look at something monstrous and go, oh, yeah, that's a girl. Unless it, is hot.
Or it, like, transforms from a girl first.
Right.
Which there are, like, I feel like From Software has both examples of, like, female girl transforms into something that is not humanoid recognizable, and also, like, female humanoid scary sexy. Well, I don't want to. I'm thinking about like what's the Let Me Solo Her boss? Melania? Melania?
I think it's Melena, but that's not right. Yeah, Melania.
Melania goes from, I believe, having, I think she has her armor on at first, and then becomes more naked and shows off more the rot on her body. And I think that has more to do with, like, body horror than it does with, like, sexy scary. But it is still, like, she sheds her clothes and grows, right, like, rot rings or whatever, so.
No, it's, there's a lot of that. The, like, oh, like, they're naked now, and now they're scary. And even if that's not...
And there's something true to that, right? Like, something scary about vulnerability. Right. But it does happen a lot with done. You don't get a lot of like, and now the male monster is a naked man, which would scare me, maybe. There's an idea for everybody out there.
That's underutilized. I think you could do a lot with that.
Yeah. I think so too. I was just throwing it out there.
Let's see some more of that. But no, I mean, I do think, it's obviously, like, broader culturally, whatever. I do think that even if you did that with, like, a male monster, I mean, just so many fewer of them resemble, like, actual human men. That, like, even if you took the troll man and you had him rip off his loincloth or whatever, like, it just wouldn't have the same... It's interesting, right? There's not really a way... to, like, make the male disrobing, like, hit like a naked woman. You know what I mean? It's like the sexy scary of it, like, that's not really how, like, we sexualize men in culture quite in the same way. So it's like, it's difficult to imagine that being even, like, we tried to be, like, fair about it.
For what it's worth, Silent Hill F has a lot of female-coded monsters, but it does also have male-coded monsters, one of which is like a big giant lump, essentially. But a couple of them are more humanoid. They don't have faces. The faces are ripped out and their chests are ripped out. But they like pounce on you.
Cool.
So you can assume what they're supposed to represent in the context of playing as a young woman.
Sure.
So there is a little bit of that. Because I was just thinking about a lot of horror games, like if they're about men, may have to do with like their fear of women and sex, and if they're about women, may also have to do with their fear about a woman and sex, but in different ways. But does both like lend themselves to creating female monster designs. But it's not like you can't make a male monster design that suits that theme as well.
Well, sure, but like thinking about it that way, I mean, you know, obviously there's a long mythological tradition of like the siren or like Lilith, mother of monsters, or any of that stuff, where like the woman as dangerous temptress doesn't necessarily read as like sexual violence, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of like, you know, whether like whatever, that's like what the sirens are, right? But like we don't think of the sirens and go like, oh yeah, like they're like committing forcible sex acts on these men or something like that, which like they aren't necessarily. They're like dangling it in front of them and then they're eating them, right? Whereas if you're trying to do something similar with a male monster, you're like wading into territory that is like it's just like more complicated to navigate, right? We feel very comfortable with the like, oh yeah, like the woman's gonna flirt with you and then eat your heart.
Yeah.
Right? That's like not the equivalent narrative for a male monster is like far more threatening and rough. So I get it from that perspective. But also like, let's see some rotted peen.
Never say that again.
Make that the title of the episode, please. She won't do it.
I will not do it.
Okay, let me pivot to something wholesome then. Let me cleanse the palate. Shall I?
Let's do it.
I want to talk about Pokemon design. Because who is designing more creatures than the freaks at Game Freak?
Nobody.
So it was interesting to me to read a little bit. You know, there's sort of a notable, I think, 2017, game developer article with, what is the name of this? Oh, no, I'm sorry, not game developer. Game Informer. Sorry, too many publications. Yes, a 2017 interview with Junichi Masuda, who's like one of the producers at Game Freak, who talks a bit about like, okay, how do they approach designing Pokemon? And like, it's interesting the way he talks about it, and then when you like really dig into like, okay, what must have actually gone into these designs? But he does make it sound like they pretty much they take like most ideas. They're like, oh, that sounds great, which makes sense. There are like 1,000 Pokemon now, so you probably can't be too choosy about what a Pokemon is going to be now. But he also mentions, he's like, you know, we aren't always doing this from the graphic design perspective, and it's not always graphic designers who are coming up with the ideas, and not all Pokemon start from we draw the Pokemon, right? Sometimes we have a move that we want to use, or sometimes there's like a story thing where we need a Pokemon that's going to do something or look like something. So just like everywhere else, even in this game that needs to be churning out designs, they've got multiple things in mind. Yeah. Who would have thought?
Yeah.
I did like, though, that something that's a particular challenge for them is thinking about Pokemon evolutions.
Yeah.
I thought his quote about this was particularly funny. He said, one thing that happens a lot, well, not a lot, but happens sometimes, is that you start out with a cat, and when it evolves, one easy idea is to say, okay, now there's more heads.
So true. Easy.
Yeah. Then he says, we always want to make sure we think, why does that happen? And when it evolves, why does it have 3 heads? So he and then he draws a cat on the white. It says, after hastily drawing the three-headed cat used to illustrate his point, Masuda laughs, saying, even if I said I really wanted to make this, I would probably get shot down. So I do think that's an interesting challenge in this game where the evolution is very important to it, to think, you have to set up a character design that's going to grow in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, and they've got this additional mega evolution mechanic now too.
Yeah.
Where they have special big forms of these monsters, where they have to, continue to iterate even on older designs from older games in the series and be like, okay, but how do we make this even cooler?
Yeah.
I think that's something that's really interesting about video games as a medium that has a lot of ongoing anthology series, in a way that a lot of other things don't, is that there's a lot of series that have monster designs that carry over from title to title, but are set in very different contexts or designed by very different artists. I was reading an interview with Toshiyuki Itahana, who worked on the Chocobo Dungeon games, where they have a very cute versions of chocobos, right? And talking about how do you make an existing design recognizable but also significantly cuter. And I also just think thinking about how chocobos are portrayed in every single numbered Final Fantasy can change drastically, right? The chocobo, Moogles too, yeah. The chocobo of 16 is not the same as the chocobo of 9, right? Because they are drastically different art styles and drastically different tones. And so you can have discussions of which game has your favorite chocobo design in a way that other mediums you can't do that, right? Or which game makes Pikachu look the best or whatever,
Well, and it's interesting for these long-running series too, how much of the art style, and I'm talking about Pokemon specific here, but I suppose you could talk about belts in Final Fantasy as well if you want. But for Pokemon, so much of kind of what we expect about the standard art style of a Pokemon was determined by the fact that the first games were coming out for Game Boy and Game Boy Advance, right? So those platforms had real technical limitations, particularly about color palettes, right? I mean, if they were coming out on the original Game Boy, there was not color, but of course there were official designs. But you want those Pokemon to resemble the drawings that you're putting out. And so because of that, the designs really rely heavily on contrast or stripes or bold patterns that you can see, and only a few colors, right? Even as you move through a couple of generations where you have a little bit of color, I think the Game Boy Advance has it can do 12 colors at once or something. But that's not really 12 colors, because if you need some shading on a specific color, you have to use 3 of those colors each for the color or something like that. So it's interesting that some of these, I read an interesting, IGN did some coverage on it, but it was a Reddit post from someone who designs fake Pokemon, right? And was talking about, people make all of these fake Pokemon designs, and sometimes you look at it and you go, that's a fake. And sometimes you look at it and you go, oh my God, is that a leak? Right? And the things that define the Pokemon style are you shouldn't have too many colors. The designs are usually detailed but not intricate. They're stylized but not too muscly, right? They're pretty simple in a sense.
Yeah.
And that even in that article, that interview with I've already forgotten his name, Masuda. They talked to him in that article because at the time there was some kind of viral video going around about how the style of Pokemon's eyes had changed. That in the earlier Pokemon, they have these kind of sharp, defined eyes, or that many of them have very similar looking. There's only 3 or 4 types of eyes that you see across Pokemon, and now they've cutified them a little bit. And he basically said, because there were not very many pixels and not really any color on the Game Boy, we literally really couldn't effectively make circles. So the Pokemon have these kind of pointy eyes because we could not draw a circle. Which is really, like, is sort of crazy to think about that even now, like, when did Pokemon come out? Like 30 years later.
Yeah.
Right? Some of the design ethos of this game was set by just the fact that, like, there were things they couldn't do on the Game Boy, and everyone's idea of what a Pokemon looks like was set in those first couple generations.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
It's cool. It's fun. Well, anything else to say about monsters? Mimics are cool.
What did you say?
Mimics are cool.
Yeah. Well, it's scary. Mimicking things is scary.
Mimics are a monster that shows up in Prey. What year did Prey come out? The Prey that's by Arcade. And they're just like little bloppy guys.
2017.
They're like, their actual form is just like little shadow heartless guys with less facial features. But they can turn into like objects around the room. And so appear innocuous until you get close enough, and then they attack you, which is a very smart idea for a monster in a video game, I think. Yeah. There are ways to like identify a mimic if you're looking closely around the room, but if you're in a hurry or just not paying attention, they can really get you in that game, which is fun. There was a sort of a tangential interview with like one of the Dead Space guys about like horror, and thinking about like when you're making a jump scare in a game, when you first put it in, it's like just sort of comical because like the lighting is not done or the sound effects or anything. So by the time you get to the point where it's like completely done, also as a designer, you've become entirely desensitized to it because you remember when it was like just like green blocks coming up to get you or whatever. And so sometimes it's hard to be scared by your own game when you've seen what's gone into it. I just think that's funny of like, yeah, when you're making like a jump scare, this probably applies to movies too. Like, it's probably not that scary in the moment, actually.
Yeah.
Like at all.
I've got to, let's talk this. So, do you have any thoughts about Kingdom Hearts monster design you'd like to share?
I did go looking for this. There was not a lot of interviews I can find. I bet there's a bunch of stuff in the Ultimanias, which are like the guidebooks that they put out for it, that I just didn't search too hard for. I found a couple on like the basic Heartlet designs of like the Shadow, the Soldier, and like Dark Side, like the first 3 types of Heartless you see in the first Kingdom Hearts. That was basically just like Nomura talking a little bit about like how these are kind of like the base for all the different Heartless.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to think about. I think the Shadow one was like they wanted to display a lot of them, and so it had to be very simple. And he also wanted to make them become a flat shadow and move around, and so that was like the concept for the design. He also talked about like at the beginning it was a little more comical feeling.
Yeah.
There still has that little bit of that edge, right? They're kind of silly looking.
No, they're not scary. I can't think of a single
they're
enemy in
spooky.
Kingdom Hearts that's scary.
They're spooky. Right?
Yeah.
That doll in Toy Story in Kingdom Hearts 3 is a little scary.
Okay, that's fair.
But that one's like not at all a typical design,
yeah.
And that's kind of why it's scary, right?
Yeah.
But I imagine that fits with like when Sora had like a chainsaw and lion ears and stuff.
Sure.
Sort of comical. Yeah, it's interesting to like be like, okay, so like everything had like a starting concept kind of, and then like things built out from there. So it's just interesting to see that sort of design process happen. And of course the shadows are very iconic for being just little guys.
They're just little dudes.
I honestly think the like just little guy monster is the best way to create like slimes in Dragon Quest. Very iconic. And they're just little guys.
Yeah.
They're just like little guys with faces. And that's
Your
all
game
you need.
probably should have a just little guy monster.
What should?
Your game should probably have a just a little guy monster.
Yeah. You gotta get on that merchandising opportunity.
Correct.
If you don't have a little guy,
that
one.
is the most important part of monster design. Listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
Do you have favorite monsters in video games, or monsters that you think are so scary that nothing scarier could ever be drawn ever again? Do you feel like you could design a Pokemon that would fool someone into thinking it was a real Pokemon? Do you think that it would be better if in your life sometimes the areas despawned so you could like move through them sort of fast? I do sometimes wish my coffee table would despawn.
Mm-hmm.
Like that would be cool if it just didn't load in. If you have thoughts about this or anything else we talked about this week, hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog. But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, wherever you can find podcasts. Subscribe to Talk This so you never miss an episode on Sundays at noon Standard Time. What are we talking about next week, Emma?
Next week, for our old game, we're talking about Terraria.
Right.
And for our new game, we're talking about drag X cross times or blank drive.
We'll certainly know. And then it's 6 weeks in gaming? Are you kidding me?
And then it's 6 weeks in gaming. Yay!
The real monster is time.
Hades 2.
That's it for this week's show. Thanks for tuning in. Emma, sign us off.
This week, I hope that your little monsters are just dogs on the inside.